And now we move over to the French Revolution. The French Revolution is one that's really the most fascinating because of how it goes quickly from a real populist uprising, and then is quickly taken over by special interests, and then made into the monstrosity that it is, quite frankly. So we're going to set the scene for pre-revolution France, and in order to set the scene, we need to talk about the governing system in France. You had an absolute monarch, but this absolute monarch is beginning to bore with the ideas of governance, and it's going to start trading off some power to the parliamentary system that they have, which is known as the States General. And the States General is split into three different estates that vote together, and then they all meet in a general assembly, and the votes are sort of tallied and then presented to the king. So, of these three estates consist of the first estate being the clergy, the second estate being the nobility, and the third estate being everybody else. So, basically, if you are rich enough to be voted into the assembly, you or buy your way into the assembly, really, you have a vote here. And so the states general sort of meets every now and then, and of the different estates gets one vote, and it's majority rules. So usually the clergy and the nobility, even though they are a smaller number of people, they usually outvote the rest of the rest of society. In After the death of Louis XIV, you have the reign of Louis XV. And Louis XV's reign is marked by a lot of bad luck. You have a lot of bad harvests. You have manufacturing depression, and the rising prices for food. So basically, everything that's going right with England at this time is going wrong with France. You have a lot of social woes. You're seeing the poor being taxed much more than the rich, and you can't really do anything about the taxation issue because the first and the second estate have basically said that they can't be taxed, and so this leads to a huge loss of revenue for the crown because of there's a lot of costly wars. The French are the elite and the most powerful military uh, the um, on the continent, and so fighting these battles um, is very costly. And so without being able to tax the first and second estate, it's all the taxes basically falls on everybody else. So the clergy and the nobility face no taxes, while everyone else is increasingly heavily taxed. And so this is going to lead to basically a powder keg in France. Everything is ripe for revolution. Everything is right for the other shoe to drop, so to say. You have the rise of the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie are a merchant class, a minor nobility, a moneyed class that really believes in the political ideas of the Enlightenment. They really feel that this idea of equality and um, and for lack of a better term, moving away from superstition is the true form of man. And so they are very much opposed to the nobility and to the clergy because of this, and their power is actually stifled by the government because the bourgeoisie begins to take over the third estate, and every time they try to gain more power, or try to flex economic power, or try to gain equality to the clergy and the nobility, they are quickly stifled because even though they are a huge power base, they only have one vote in the Estates General. And so, with the bourgeoisie becoming increasingly angry, you also have the death of Louis the 15th, and the rise of Louis the 16th, who is a very eager but a weak monarch. He is very eager to show that he believes in the ideals of the Enlightenment, and that he um, is willing to put France forward, and to be a strong military-minded monarch. He's the one that really helps the Americans by sending by agreeing to ally with them and to fight against England. So initially you have some good fortune under Louis the 16th, but pretty soon he begins to fall into the same trappings as his father, as they are they are spending way too much money. You also have the unpopular Queen Marie Antoinette, who many people said controlled Louis the 16th. And basically made him do her bidding. Of course, this would be male historians that would have said this afterwards. But Louis and Marie Antoinette are basically seen as being inseparable, as she is the puppet mistress, controlling him and making him do whatever she says. And this is really damaging among the nobility and among the clergy, because remember, you have to follow the rules of law, rules of God and nature, and not and having your wife tell you what to do in the eyes of the super conservative Catholics would be going against that law of nature. And so Louis the 16th is not a very well respected leader, very well liked leader. And so pretty much the country goes into debt, and the rich and clergy are basically in charge of everything. They control. They are untaxed, and they have begun um, to flex their muscle against the rising bourgeoisie. So, like I said, traditionally each estate had one vote whenever they met for the Estates General. They were constant. The third estate was constantly being overruled by the clergy and the nobility. And basically in 1789, the third estate had had enough and demanded voting change. They wanted it to be a much more democratic, much more egalitarian system. And so the estates general meet, and the there's a lot of arguing, and the third estate walks out, and basically it's like, okay, we're going to take a break, and then everybody comes back in. And so the third estate is locked out of the assembly chamber, and a lot of stories say that this was on purpose by the first and second estate, to lock out, literally and figuratively, the third estate from voting in this new for this new voting change. And then there's also stories that it was accidentally locked by a butler who was, or by a custodian uh, who thought that they were done for the day, and so he locked it up. And then the third estate comes back and finds themselves locked out. But however it happened, um, the third estate is furious, and they go and they try to find the closest place that they have to that's big enough that they can all meet. And the only place that they can find is a racquetball court. And so this is known as the racquetball assembly, which becomes the National Assembly. And this National Assembly begins to set up a new governmental system, a new legislative system that will be much more democratic, and will send laws to the king in order to govern the country moving forward. Now, after this happens, you start hearing stories about the about the loyalist forces, the noblemen's forces, and the crown's forces beginning to round people up, beginning to take political prisoners. Well, the Parisians find out about this, and they say that there are political prisoners in the Bastille, and Parisians, finding that people are being locked up, they go and they storm the Bastille. But for some reason, they go in there and they find that it was all just rumors, and no one's actually locked up in the Bastille. No political prisoners. They do find lots of guns, lots of cannons, and they begin to, on July 14th, 1789, Parisians storm the Bastille and take the cannon, and that's why July 14th is Bastille Day in France. And basically, the king can no longer enforce his will. The people are beginning to rebel. The third estate, the National Assembly, now is beginning um, to take control, and you're seeing lots of riots breaking out. You're seeing uh, people running to the countryside in what is known as the Great Fear, and this is the nobility leaving Paris, leaving Versailles, and running out to their estates in the countryside, where they feel that they'll be safer. There's stories that people are storming estates and killing and burning things down, and so the nobility runs away, and actually many of them leave France. And so this leads to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789. And this allows all citizens to take part in the legislative process. This is the beginning of the uh, pure democratization of France, as these new declaration, the rights of man and citizen, is like the American Bill of Rights, the English Bill of Rights as well, but it goes even further. Talks about everyone being a part of the legislative process, and what everyone means will become much more apparent in a few years. But after this Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, you have the Constitution of 1791 being passed by the National Assembly, that strips the Church of power, that takes lands away from the nobility, but still the monarchy survives. And here you have a political cartoon of Louis XVI wearing the red sash and the hat of the revolutionaries, and sort of faking it that he's a revolutionary as well, as he begins to say that he greatly admires the revolutionary spirit, and will work with this new legislative assembly, as it becomes known, to share power. And this is basically the end of French absolutism. Now you have a French constitutional monarchy. And so, after this end of French absolutism, you start seeing the fear that quickly escalates among the nobles, as they begin to leave and run away from France at this time. The nobles are going to escape to Austria and Prussia, where many of them uh, have their origins. Austria and Prussia are very intermixed with French nobility at this point, as you know, Prussia will basically uh, eh, be the source of very various noble lines in Europe throughout the centuries. And so, after the end of absolute monarchy, after the taking of lands and democratizing the government, these nobles are going to move to Austria and Prussia. They're going to hire mercenaries, and get the empires to agree to declare war on France, as they do not see this as a legitimate government in 1792. and you have the beginnings of the Franco-Prussian War. This begins in middle of 1792, and by um, the 10th of August, you have the palace overrun. You have the French forces fighting bravely, but in vain against the invading Austro-Prussians. And it looks like the noble led forces will prevail. However, in 1793, the the tide turns, and the French armies are able to rally and defeat the Austro-Prussians. The Austro-Prussians are going to quickly abandon the war because they really don't have any. They have everything to lose and really nothing to gain at this point. And one of the main heroes during this time, a young Napoleon Bonaparte, will gain quite a lot of fame throughout France for his victorious uh, campaigns against the invaders, and then he will be sent off away from from France to go fight against the British in Egypt. And so after this, because of the fact that the nobility came and tried um, to take over the country again, they realized that that the whole idea of nobility and monarchy can't coexist with the society that they are trying to create, and so the National Convention is going to abolish the monarchy. And once this happens, you start seeing a lot more factionalism rise in among the National Convention. The you know This is basically the fourth version of this legislative power. They started out as the third estate, then there were National Assembly, then the Constitution made them the Legislative Assembly, and now they are this National Convention, this national force that gets rid of the monarchy and begins a to create a new government that is purely democratic, that is going to be led by a committee of individuals who will guide the country moving forward. And this legislative force is going to quickly splinter um, into these different factions that are members of what is known as the Jacobin Club. And the Jacobins were a political force during the French Revolution. They were very radicals that believed in the most extreme ways to get rid of the nobility and get rid of the monarchy, even if it meant execution. Um, and so their rhetoric begins to increase even further after the abolishment of the monarchy, as the Montagnards begin to split off. The Montagnards are um, a were the most radical group. Excuse me. They were the ones that were the most leftist, that were the most actively trying to get rid of the monarchy and trying to replace it with a purely democratic system. And on the other side, you had the Girondins, and the Girondins were a much more um, moderate people. The they were much more um, economically liberal or libertarian, but as far as socially, they were a little bit more conservative. They were moderate by the standards then, and so there was a lot of infighting between the Girondins and the Montagnards. The Girondins really didn't want the king alive. The Montagnards didn't want the king alive. The Girondins were like, we should probably keep the king. Don't kill him. You saw what happened in England when they got rid of the king, and so this ends up being a huge political fight that ends up leading to the assassination of Jean Paul Marat. And Jean Paul Marat was one of the most radical of the Montagnard political writers at the time, and Jean Paul Marat was a very influential writer, um, very influential philosopher, and he published pamphlets all over the place. But one of the things was that he actually had a skin condition, like it was like severe eczema, so he needed baths on a daily basis, or his skin would dry out completely. And so you had John Paul Marat writing in his bath, and his usual maid didn't show up. Instead, it was a Girondin spy who came and murdered him. And once Charlotte Corday murders Jean Paul Marat, you have the beginnings of the Montagnards beginning this cruel and swift retaliation campaign against the Girondins, as the Girondins are going to be branded as enemies of the state, and they will be rounded up and put in prison. And then the beginnings of the political um, witch hunts will begin, and these witch hunts will begin with and will lead to the reign of terror under Maximilien Robespierre. Robespierre is a Montagnard who rises through the ranks and quickly begins to consolidate power once the Montagnards are at the upper echelons of power. He creates the Committee of Public Safety, and this committee takes control of the government. One of the things that Robespierre really believes in, however, is the equality of everybody, and this includes Africans. And he's going to abolish slavery in the French colonies, and basically set the stage for future um, for future revolutions. That's what it meant. And under Maximilian Robespierre, you're also going to have the introduction of the guillotine to France, as political prisoners need to be executed quickly, and in a much more spectacular way. And the guillotine is just that. And you start seeing the beginnings of mass executions that are all political prisoners. And then you also see the execution of Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette and Louis the 16th actually tried to escape France against Louis's will. However, he feels that he will be safe, but Marie convinces him that they need to get away, and they are eventually caught. They dress up as commoners and are still caught, and are both seen as being in treason and enemies of the state, and are executed. And this happens throughout as more and more people are branded as enemies, as people are rounded up, as people begin to turn on one another. This is why it's called the reign of terror, because you could be you could anger your neighbor, and they could tell a secret policeman that that you were plotting to overthrow the government. You were or you said something bad about Robespierre or the committee, and you would be arrested and pretty much executed without trial. So this reign of terror leads to the execution of political prisoners, the execution of the king and queen of France, and then pretty soon is going to lead to the execution of revolutionaries themselves. And so the revolution will implode on itself, and you will see the death of many of these once very strong and influential leaders. Maximilian Robespierre himself will also die during this reign of terror. Um, Robespierre will anger too many people and will eventually himself be branded an enemy of the state, and he will be arrested as he is trying to as the police come to arrest him. He will actually try to kill himself, shoot himself in the face, but the at the last second the gun will be moved from his head, and he will instead shoot his own jaw off, and his jaw will be hanging off by on one side, and it will be wrapped in a bandage. And instead of getting the guillotine, he will actually be hanged uh, to his uh, uh, to his chagrin, as he wanted a spectacular death. But he gets a spectacular death, as when he goes to be executed, uh, the executioner slips on the noose and then rips off the handkerchief that is holding his jaw together. And he basically, as he screams in agony, that is the last that you hear from him, as he as the trapdoor is open, and he falls to his death, choking and screaming in agony. And that is the end of Robespierre. And that is basically the end of the revolution. After the revolution, you have the rise of the Directory, which is a civil group of moderates that were brought in to control and rein in the government, and they basically inherit a failing economy and many foreign wars, and this leads to even more inequality and even more unemployment and and terrible times in France. And so there's a lot of riots and rebellions, and the director is forced to use the army to crush the insurrection. This leads them to be very unpopular among the people of France. So they're viewed pretty unfavorably by the French people. So, with an unpopular directory, with the entire country basically in ruins, the more conservative members of the legislature of the assembly begin to look for a new leader. They want someone that they feel that they can put into power, and then basically control. And the person that they choose for this is Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte is a military strategist and leader, and he's won a lot of um, crucial victories for France. And when he gets back into uh, um, into Paris in 1799, he's greeted as a hero. He has defeated the British. He has he is seen as someone that can be used for lifting the morale of the French people, and the French people finally have something to be proud of. And so he returns to France as a hero, and then he is recruited by these conservative assembly members to be part of a coup. And on November 9th, 1799, he brings goes into the National Assembly and has the assembly arrested as enemies of the state. And from here, he suspends the legislature, and he's put in charge, and he becomes part of the consulate. and the Napoleon is put into power with two other men who aren't as important, and he is named the first consulate. And as first consulate, he gets to name the other two consuls. And with this, these three consuls are supposed to rule jointly, but really Napoleon has the power. And a quick note is that at one point. Uh, the Marquis de Lafayette was um, uh, actually asked to be a part of this consulate, and he said no. He said he didn't trust Napoleon. He didn't think that Napoleon could be controlled, and so he refuses to it. Instead, stays retired countryside in France. Meanwhile, Napoleon is given absolute power and begins to use that absolute power. And Napoleon is really the right man at the right time. The French want a strong leader. The French want a strong man that could lead them into prominence once more. Napoleon brings some sort of stability to a country that hasn't had stability. France has gone through so many different iterations of government over the last decade, from the Bastille days, 1789, all the way to the coup in 1799. Napoleon is there to give them order. Napoleon is there to be the strong center that will move France forward. And he plays that part perfectly well. And he is exactly what is needed for France at this time, or at least what they think is needed for France at this time.